Ladies and gentlemen, technical difficulties beyond our control are delaying our presentation.
Now, good morning to everyone in my night audience.
Station operates on a frequency of 1,406 kilohertz.
Completion of general mobilization.
Oh, I heard you heard a lot of reading today. Even though you told me you didn't do a lot of reading, you know most of the stuff.
Okay, that is half true because a lot of this comes from my lectures. A lot of this comes from like readings that I did for class. Like I didn't do any extra reading. I did just regular amounts of reading. So I did medium amounts of reading today, and I'm like actually so excited for this topic. Like so excited because it's actually anthropology. It makes me so glad.
Let's rock and roll. Let's hear what you got to say.
Yeah. So I'm excited today for my topic, not only because it's anthropology, but also because it's not really a concrete topic. I mean, it is, but it isn't. So, as you know, I'm an anthropology major, and my absolute favorite class right now is my psychological anthropology class with Professor Samuele Collu. And he's a very Italian man. He's so wonderful. If there are any McGillians out there, this man is 10 out of 10. Very engaging. I would definitely recommend. So, 2 weeks ago, we read this chapter in the book Group Psychology and the Analysis of the Ego by Sigmund Freud. Yours truly. Yeah, that's not me, but the true Sigmund Freud.
The man, the myth,
the legend. Yeah. So this chapter basically discussed identification and identity in the context of a group. Now, do you know what identification is?
Just tell me anyways.
Okay. So identification is essentially the process. Well, you know what identity is, right? It's who you feel as a person. It's who you are, right?
Yeah.
But identification is when you identify with something. So I'll explain this a little bit more later, but just keep in mind that identification is when you identify with something. When you look at something and you make it a part of your identity. Like you make that thing a part of yourself, right?
Oh, okay.
So while reading, we had to ask ourselves questions like what makes you identify with a specific group, a leader, a concept, or even an image. And according to Freud, it's our libidinal energy, or in other words, our passionate energy that has links to sexual energy, but that link is a little bit complicated to explain. So we're just going to keep it to passionate energy that drives us to feel emotional links and connections. So all this passion, we're like, wow, emotions, connections, links. Whenever you feel emotional about something, you feel happy about something, you tend to remember it more. You tend to absorb it into your being a lot easier than it would be otherwise. And we only begin to identify with something, that is, make it a part of our identity, when we can at the same time form emotional bonds with the other people who are also feeling the same vibes as we are. So essentially what that means is, like, let's say you're in a big group of people. Like, let's say you're in a protest, okay? Or at a concert. At a concert is an even better example. So you're at a concert and everyone who's there is all vibing on the same band. Everyone's like, wow, I love this band. I'm super into this. And as you're in this group, you feel like everybody's your friend. You feel like you're making emotional bonds with everybody in the audience because everyone is there for the same reason. Everyone in that audience is a group that is identifying with this one band. Does that make sense? Okay, so another example of this would be, so in the United States, people identifying as either a Democrat or a Republican. And people identifying as either a Democrat or a Republican is actually a part of who they are as a person. So for example, someone's like, hi, I'm Stacy, I'm a Democrat, my eyes are blue, and I'm 5'4". In her case, being a Democrat is just as obvious as her having blue eyes. So like, out of curiosity, how would you introduce yourself? Like what, like during icebreakers and whatever, people are like, Thomas, introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you say?
I have this, I don't know. I don't really identify myself with things other than history, which is sad. But I always tell people, yeah, I'm the most
No,
okay
but that's
person
okay.
you'll ever
That's
meet
what
in your
you
life.
identify with.
Yeah. I guess. I don't like
but
to,
like,
yeah. I don't group myself with people, you know?
That makes sense. But I mean, for example, do you say I'm Scottish?
No, I only bring that up in conversation when it's appropriate.
Really?
Yes, I don't go to people and go, "Hi, I'm Scotty."
Wow. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Like, that's actually really interesting because, anyways, that's a whole other thing that we could get into, very anthropological, but not for today. But, like, when people ask me, like, oh, Olivia, like, say your name and one interesting thing about yourself, I'll be like, I'm Olivia and I'm half Greek, half Italian, and I play music. Those are like my 3 things that I identify with. I'm like, that is who I am. And like recently I've been like, and I knit and I sew and this is who I am because like, I don't know, I guess I identify with the hobbies that I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like that becomes a part of me. I feel like that's me, you know? Okay, so once that emotional bond or link is made with the group and you begin to identify with that group, anything that challenges the values of the group you identified becomes threatening or like evil. Mm-hmm. You manage to bond so heavily with a certain concept and the people in that group that you start to kind of like incorporate that threat into your own being. So if someone threatens the group, you personally feel threatened. You identify with the concept so intensely that you now are the concept. So for example, people who identify with far right or far left political ideologies see anything that goes against their ideas as more than just a threat. They'll see those ideas as an attack on their personhood, on their humanity, because they and the political ideology are one. Right? So it's like, well, no, like the far right, they're doing stupidities because we want to have our freedoms and personal stuff. And then the far right will look at the liberals and be like, no, that's stupidities. What are you doing? And they feel like personally attacked by what the opposite group is saying about their group, right? Mm. Also, have you ever noticed that like people with green eyes, like when someone tells them, oh, you have blue eyes, they like turn into the Hulk and they're like, no, my eyes are green. And it's like, I don't know. I feel like it's because they feel like they're part of the green-eyed group and not the blue-eyed group, right?
Mm-hmm. It's a tribal thing, I think. I had this thought the other day, actually. It's very tribal. Yeah, it's... You're waiting for me to go on here. I ain't got nothing else. Continue.
I am. I'm waiting for an elaboration because this seems like an interesting concept that I didn't touch upon. I mean, I'm going to come back to this. So if you want to think about it, you can think about it and then we could talk about it later. Yeah. Okay, so next. So when I read this chapter, the Freud chapter, and listened to the lecture by my professor, I like immediately thought of our current state of affairs. And like when I say our current state of affairs, I basically mean the year 2020. And when I thought about 2020, I began to wonder how much of our reactions to the absolute hellfire of a year we've been experiencing have been because of the isolation we have lived because of COVID. Now, you may be thinking at this point, like, huh, what are you talking about? Like, huh? Where are you coming from? This is like completely out of left field. What I mean is, if we think about Freud and his concept, that's the social interaction of a group, the concept that we only begin to identify with something when we can at the same time form emotional bonds with the other people who are also feeling the same vibes as we are. Like that concept, because we're in the age of COVID, we don't necessarily have that anymore. We don't have that feeling of being in a big group together and feeding off each other's energies. We were isolated and confined to our homes for like a solid 3 months and like more in some places. And we're kind of getting back into that now too. But yet we have had some super intense riots, some extreme reactions to politics, and some really passionate people leading very large groups in the name of change. So like, what the heck? Like, where's this coming from? No physical interactions, but yet people are still identifying with causes. So the obvious answer here is like the internet, right? And people still read the news and feel strongly about things which inspire them to discuss it with people online. But I think it actually goes further than that, because 2019 had disastrous things happening. So did 2018 and 2016. I mean, in 2018, there was the first wave of Black Lives Matter. And for some reason, nobody really remembers that anymore. But yeah, like the amount of civil unrest has never been as intense as it has been this year. So what is it about this year that's so special? What do you think?
Here, do you remember the Arab Spring?
The Arab Spring.
You don't remember the Arab Spring? Back in 2011, a majority of Arab countries basically rose up in revolt against their governments, most notably Egypt. And that was started over the internet, like you just said. So continue on what you were saying. So maybe they're linked in some way. We'll see.
So, okay, so not disclaimer. Everything that I say from here on about this particular topic is my hypothesis, and I don't actually think there is one right answer. I think there's so many answers, so many parts into this 1,000-piece puzzle. So why are people so passionate this year when arguably worse shit has happened in other years, right? Like, why are people identifying so strongly with so many causes, including anti-masking, which is something that's like seriously such a tiny speck on the scale of global importance, but yet it's filling up our news. So from what I can tell, I think that unconsciously people miss feeling included. People miss feeling that emotional, physical link with other people in the group that allows them to identify with a cause. In the end, our personalities are nothing but all of our passions, good and bad, mixed up together. Our identity is made up of our ethnicity, where we live, our class, where we go to school, what we study. So when we're locked up in our houses and we can't interact with the groups and elements that we identify with, we kind of feel empty. It's like when we go searching for things to identify with because we don't recognize who we are anymore. And in finding new causes, concepts, or people to identify with through the internet, we can feel whole again. And in the end, I think as a species, humans fear loss. And one of the greatest losses we can feel is the loss of ourselves. When we no longer recognize ourselves, when our ideal image doesn't match what we see in the mirror, we scramble to regain identity. So it's almost like the internet has been an assistance to people feeling like they need to find themselves, that they need to identify with something. And I think, those identities were always there, but because of the fact that people are isolated and confined to their homes and they can't necessarily feel interaction with other people and they're not as busy, like it hits harder, and people are more passionate, are tending to go more to extreme levels to get their point across. And especially with all the time that we've been spending on the internet over this period of isolation, I mean, you tend to identify so strongly with other people who are in the same boat as you that you then can do crazy amazing things or crazy intense things.
There's something I want to add as well.
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Go for it.
So here's the thought I had a couple of weeks ago. It's like, wow. So you got anti-vaxxers and you got flat earthers, right? They sort of fall in the same group. They identify as such and such. So here's a question to you. Do you want to be normal? Do you want to fit in with everybody? And do you want to be seen as, just another person? Or do you want to be unique?
I think to a certain extent, everyone wants to be unique, but there's this inherent desire to fit in as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, anti-vaxxers, flat earthers, anti-vaxxers, I think in a way they were driven to believe all that because it fits outside of the norm. And they see themselves as special and creative because of this. But the more you make fun of them, and the more you call them stupid, the more they call them dumb, the deeper they dig their own hole, the more they start to believe the things that they believe. So, just a thought I had. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's an actual thing?
Oh, I think that must be a huge part of it because, I mean, just as I was mentioning before, like as soon as you start threatening a group, as soon as you start threatening something someone identifies with, it becomes a threat on themselves, right? And what do people do when they feel threatened? They'll dig deeper into what they believe, right? So it's almost like with the anti-vaxxers, by saying they're stupid, by saying they make no sense, we're kind of digging them further into their hole because they feel threatened and they feel attacked. So when you feel attacked, you go on the defensive and you stand your ground. And I think, that definitely has a big part of it.
Even if they come to the conclusion that they're wrong, they're still going to defend themselves. Because the worst thing you can feel is wrong. And you don't like that. So.
No. Especially when you've identified with it. Especially if it's like now a part of who you feel you are. Because it's like, well, no, like this is it. This is me. This is what I believe. I'm special and I'm unique and I'm right. And now someone's coming along being like, no, you're dumb. Like, what are you even thinking? This is wrong. They're going to say, I am personally offended by your words. I'm not dumb. You're dumb. Right?
Yeah. Imagine being told your identity is dumb.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. That's essentially being told just like everything you believe is stupid AF. And I mean, yeah. And I mean, on that point, like there's also, I think that's why people are so passionate about anti-masking too, because like people don't want to follow the sheep. They don't want to feel like they're a sheep. And I think anti-maskers fall into the category with anti-vaxxers and flat earthers because it's like, I mean, anti-masking, like wearing a mask is so not a big deal. I mean, you put a piece of cloth over your face, you live your life, you could still breathe through it. It's like wearing a scarf in the wintertime. But yet people are freaking the F out about it. And I think people just want to identify with other people and like they found a cause that they can all identify with each other with and be like, hey, I'm protesting against something and I feel included and I feel special. And now I'm going to identify with this because I want to fight for something that I believe is legit, I guess. And to a certain extent, we do that with everything. And we target the things that are the least logical to us because it's the easiest thing to criticize. But I think we all do it to some extents and purposes. I mean, even just our political standings. I mean, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. Now, I'm going to kind of take a sidestep because this whole concept made me think of something else as well. So as I was reading, I was listening to the lectures, I was like, whoa. On the same note, we can also take the case of cultural appropriation as an example. And you'll see where I'm going with this, but cultural appropriation is such a debated and controversial topic. And I think it's because like nobody can agree what is and isn't appropriation. So if we back up a little bit and remember what I mentioned about seeing anything that goes against your identity as a threat, we can get a better idea of this. As me, a second generation Canadian Italian, I can tell you that when I went to Italy for the first time and tried ordering a cappuccino after 11 a.m., my family looked at me like I was insane and they were like, no, Olivia, non si fa, we don't do that here. Cappuccinos are only for breakfast. But like that absolute disgust in their eyes. They were looking at me like I had just insulted their personhood. And I find that's like a perfect example of the concept of identifying with not only a group, but a cultural rule or a cultural element or an aspect. Do you have any in Scotland?
In Scotland, not particularly. Well, there's wearing socks, low socks on a kilt. You don't do that. You wear your high socks. I can give you a good example of one in Japan, though.
Ooh, go for it.
It's holding hands. Showing affection in public, holding hands, is a big no-no. Littering is a big no. Walking while eating is a big no-no. You get weird looks. Tipping is just flat out insulting. They don't accept tips. It's just, it's a whole nother world to them. Just the things that we consider normal over there is like, what the hell are you doing, sir? Get the hell out of my shop.
And these are all, I mean, really cultural rules that, you know, if someone really strongly culturally identifies with this and then they see that it's done wrong by an outsider who's obviously not of the same culture, like they'll get pretty offended on the first shot. They'll be like, what the hell? Like super vexed about it. But then afterwards, you'd probably teach them the right way and be like, no, we don't do that here. Do this instead. And then give them a slap on the wrist, right? Like it wouldn't go further than that. You'd just be like, hey, you clearly don't understand how shit works here. Let me teach you. And that's that, right? But when it comes to cultural appropriation, it's so much more than that. And what I find the most interesting is when people from the same culture who identify with the same things do not agree on whether something is appropriation or not. So the first example that actually comes to mind is this post that I saw on Facebook of this little white girl. She was probably like 7 or 8, I'd assume. And she was dressed as a geisha, wearing a kimono,
Seen
and
that.
had, yeah, and
I
had
was hoping
a
you'd bring that up.
I read it and I was like, whoa, this is mind blowing. So she had a tea ceremony like situation set up behind her. And now tons of people started shitting on the mother of this girl, saying that it was cultural appropriation, that geishas are a traditional and extremely ceremonial part of Japanese culture. Yeah. But that's
but it's
not
all
what
non-Japanese people saying that.
Exactly. And that's what caught my attention. That's not like what caught my attention was the comment that a Japanese born person left. And they said that this was not cultural appropriation. And as a Japanese person, they and all the people they know feel honored when they see non-Japanese people wearing traditional Japanese clothing like a kimono. That the kimono is actually a gift that is given to visitors of Japan to remind them of their travels. And she also mentioned that the tea ceremony and makeup looked like the little girl and her mom tried really hard to get it culturally right, and she believes in cross-cultural appreciation. So, what caught my eye was actually that disagreement. Why is it that when looking at the exact same picture, Japanese people living in the United States or North America are experiencing a totally different threat level than those living in Japan? And now, also, disclaimer, this is my personal hypothesis, and I think that there are so many different elements that play into this, but I hypothesize that it's because of lived experience. So if we read the Oxford Dictionary definition of cultural appropriation, it says, and I quote, the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, ideas, etc. of one people or society by members of another and typically more dominant people or society, end quote. I think the word dominant actually really plays a key role. In America, and I could only speak for North America at this point, so we'll stay in the realm of North America, minority groups were often made fun of and segregated for their cultural identities. For Black Americans, hair, skin color, lips, curves were all elements that the white majority or dominant group used to discriminate against them. For Indigenous peoples in Canada, the potlatch, a gift-giving ceremony, and all cultural clothing was banned and taken away from them. But now, suddenly, the same majority group that used those cultural elements as discriminatory tools are now using them without citing their sources, which, if you went to high school, you know that's plagiarism and that's illegal. So that's why I think people from the homeland cultures that are visible minorities in North America don't actually have the same view of cultural appropriation as those who actually live here. If you don't live the experience of people being uneducated hypocrites about your culture, you can't really understand the damage it has done and why you do not, under any circumstance, want a white person to even approach your culture. Which I think in the end is pretty messed up because cross-cultural education and sharing is so important to promote tolerance. But so many people mess it up by being uneducated, and now this is why nobody can have nice things. As a concluding statement, if you want to buy moccasins or Indigenous beadwork, do not buy knockoffs. That's damaging. If you want to get your hair braided or permed, go to a Black-owned salon. If you literally want to do anything that isn't part of the culture you primarily identify with from birth, if you live in North America, do your research and be a good scholar. Listen to the voices that have been heard by ignorance. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I hope you enjoyed this evening's lesson. Thank you.
Good job. Good job.
It's actually interesting because I did a whole paper last semester on Indigenous beadwork, Indigenous crafting. And my God, in reading all these papers written by Indigenous scholars, I was like blown away by the beautiful things that Indigenous people are making. Earrings, moccasins, bags, anything that you can bead, they bead, and it's just so beautiful. Like, I would totally recommend checking that out. There's so many people on Instagram that are like selling all these things, and it's just absolutely beautiful. And Like, to think that people are looking at this beadwork and going, I'll just buy a knockoff one. I'll buy moccasins from this, like, white-owned company who don't actually really know the significance of them. Because in the end, I mean, moccasins are shoes. Yeah, like, moccasins are shoes.
I saw them at Walmart.
And, like, there are many indigenous people who don't see them as particular. Like, it's a cultural element, but they don't see them as ceremonial. So they're like, yeah, anybody can wear them. But if you're going to buy something that's originally indigenous, like, buy it from an indigenous company. And, like, I got my moccasins from Manitoba Mucklucks, which is, like, indigenous owned companies. So it's like, send the profits to the people who originally made them, especially if, you know, they've been appropriated for so long.
Or go out to a powwow, get it directly from them.
Exactly.
Just go straight
exactly. There you go. And you learn so much from powwows. I was so sad when this year's powwows were all closed because of COVID. I was like, no, I wanted to go buy stuff. I wanted to go meet artists.
Got a buddy in Australia. He might come here one day. I'm gonna take him to a powwow.
It's such wonderful stuff, and like, if you look in the right places, you can find all the information you need. And the fact that people don't go looking for the information is just kind of c'est dommage, comme qu'on dirait en français.
I'm not there yet.
It's problematic. It is problematic.
I'm not there in my French classes yet. Slow down.
You will be. I am assisting in the French learning process.
That being said, you're going slower than my French teacher is, so there's that.
There you go. At least we have one thing. So what did you learn about today on the note of European French people?
European French people.
Says the person who already knows what the topic is, but I didn't say that.
Well, it's time for me to educate you and all the lovely fine folk at home about, drumroll please, that one, Titanic. I have such an obsession with Titanic, it's almost problematic.
I can confirm.
It's a medical problem. I need tested for this. So, I was going to do the aftermath of Titanic, but me being the absolute Titanic freak I decided we're going to do all of it. Because it is a medical and mental problem of mine, so we're going to do all of it. So.
Can I just interject for a second?
Sure, I guess.
The fact that you messaged me and you were like, so, like, I'm 3 pages in and I've only started, like, the boat hasn't even been built yet. And I was like, well then, alrighty then.
I know a little bit. This is
a little bit.
This is a fraction of what I know. I literally could make a 2-hour episode on the building alone. But
oh my god.
So
we're gonna have to make a 6-part series. The building of Titanic. The boarding. The building of Titanic. The boarding of Titanic. The food in the Titanic. The icebergs. The mechanical engineering problems. The sinking.
There is a photograph of the iceberg. You know that, right?
I actually did not know that.
There is a photo.
For some reason, I just assumed that it did exist.
Yeah, in 1912. You know, today it'd be hundreds of it. People on the ship taking pictures as it's coming. Back then.
Oh my god.
Back then, there's one photograph of it that has paint on the side of the ice. Essentially, there's paint scrapings on the side of the ice. They have a photo of the iceberg that sank the Titanic. So I recommend looking into that.
You're going to have to send that to me because I want to see.
I will send it to you. And all the lovely folks at home, Google it. That's all I can do.
Google it. Or look at the blog.
So, in 1907, one of the world's leading ship companies, Cunard, built the largest sister ships in the world. Can you name these ships?
Oh, maybe I can, actually. Okay. So we have the Titanic.
No.
No, okay, silence. We have, I feel like it's this Greek, it's not the Olympia, is it?
This is a trick question. I said Cunard built these ships. This is a different company. They built the Mauretania. They built the Mauretania and the Lusitania, which weighed 32,000 tons each. And they also held the Blue Ribbon, which means they were the fastest ships to cross the Atlantic. Or one of them was. It was the fastest ship. Everybody wanted the Blue Ribbon. It was like imagine there's one gold medal at the Olympics. That's like a platinum medal. You know, everybody wants that. So,
Not even the gold medal, the platinum medal.
The platinum medal that goes to the best athlete of the Olympics. So, their rival company, the White Star Line, gotcha. Those are the ones that built Titanic. So, the rival company, the White Star Line, decided it's time to go big or go home. So they devised a plan to build a ship so large, so grand in scale, it would obliterate the competition. Can you name that ship? No! It's your sister ship, the Olympic.
The Titanic. No, it's her sister ship.
The Olympic.
I knew it was the. I was like, the Olympia?
They didn't want to crush them. They wanted to humiliate them.
Jeez Louise, Thomas.
So they decided to build 3 identical ships. The RMS Titanic, the RMS Olympic, and the RMS Gigantic, which was later named the Britannic.
And what is it that the RMS stands for?
It stands for Royal Mail Ship.
Royal Mail?
Because they
like
didn't
postage?
just deliver Royal Mail. Yes, postage.
What?
Because they didn't carry just passengers. They were also mail ships.
Oh my god.
They had a postage. Yeah, they had a mailing system on the ship. So instead of carrying just passengers, well, we can take half the country's mail at the same time.
That's something I actually did not know, like zero. I had zero idea that was a thing, and I'm very impressed. Go on, please.
You're very welcome. Well, you also got ships called SS, right? So you got the SS. That stands for steamship. So if you hear SS, steamship, RMS, Royal Mail Ship, HMS, His Majesty's ship, which is a naval ship, and so on and so on.
Someone knows a lot about ships.
So, Olympic, Gigantic, renamed Britannic, and Titanic.
Wait,
what do they all have in common?
Can I just they had a ship that was called the Gigantic,
yeah,
and then they decided to change it.
They changed the name to Britannic.
Good job.
Yes.
I think that was a good call.
After Titanic sank. After Titanic sank. They're like, oh, jeez. So, Olympic, Britannic, Titanic. What do these names have in common?
It's all ick.
Ick. They all end in IC. So every ship of the White Star Line ended with IC. They had the Celtic, the Britannic, obviously, the Atlantic, and so on and so forth. While their rival company, Cunard, they had Lusitania, Mauritania.
Yeah.
Where did those end in? Yeah.
I would fit right in.
That's how you could tell the ships apart. That's how you can... Exactly. The RMS Olivia.
Yeah.
You'd be a Cunard ship.
I would
Good
be
job.
a Cunard ship. Woo. You would be a none of the above ship.
But keep... No. You got to keep this in mind. You got to keep this in your brain. Okay? Ia is Cunard. Ik is White Star Line. Got it? Got it. So, the second most famous ship in the world after Titanic is actually the Lusitania. Do you know why?
Because it's a Cunard ship and it went real fast because of the blue ribbon.
No, you got to look up World War I history, It's the ship that was sunk by the Germans, which is one of the main reasons the United States was brought into the war. So it's kind of a big deal.
Sorry, now I know.
So, another cool fact, the Titanic was an Olympic class ship. And so, a class of ship, if the ships all look the same, they are named after the first ship of that fleet. So if you have the SS Olivia with 5 different ships that are identical, it'd be the Olivia class ships.
Got it.
Fun. Another fun fact. So, in 1907, the chairman of the White Star Line, Bruce Ismay, met with the chairman of the shipbuilding company Harland and Wolff, based in Belfast, Ireland, and ordered the construction of 3 ships. They had to tear down everything. Their shipping docks, they had to tear it all down and rebuild it to accommodate the size of these ships. All right? They were big. They were huge. And they were building 3 of them. The crazy bastards. So, the Olympics broke ground, began on the 16th of December 1908. 3 months later, on the 31st of March, 1909, the Titanic's construction began. And there are amazing photographs of the 2 of them in dry dock being built next to each other. They're amazing. It's on purpose, though. The White Star Line actually hired a professional photographer to take pictures of the ships. So I recommend looking them up. It's amazing. So during the construction, 8 people died building the Titanic. The first of which was a man called Samuel Scott, who was 15 years old, who fell 23 feet off of a ladder onto the pavement and died instantly. That makes him the first victim of the Titanic. It wasn't someone who died on the sinking. It was one of the builders who fell off a ladder. 15 years old as well.
That was a pretty common thing back then, though.
So, yeah, it was very common.
Child
there was
workers.
no safety harnesses or anything
but also
like that.
child workers. I mean,
Well,
the things that would happen in the textile factories, ooh, that is a little scary.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, what is safety? What is standards? Another example is when they're building the ship, they had to use rivets to hold the beams together. So what they would do is they would have people who would put the rivets into, like, fire, essentially, and they would turn them red hot, and then they would fling them up onto the ship, and there would be someone on top of the ship who would grab onto it with their tongs and slam it into the ship, and on the other end, they would have 2 people with hammers who would hammer it in. And they would just throw millions of these things over the course of, like, 3 years. That was their job. Riveters.
Jesus Christ.
They didn't have electric tools either, so...
Obviously not.
Yeah,
but I mean, the fact that they're throwing scalding rivets up into the air, that's like molten iron. Anyways.
Yeah.
No thanks.
Yeah, essentially. It's what is safety conditions?
What is safety conditions? Wait, can I say something really quickly? Okay, this podcast, I've just accepted that this one's going to be extremely long. But that reminds me of, well, in the textile industries, when they would hire kids to be able to clean out the mechanical looms. So, because they had teeny tiny hands and teeny tiny bodies, so they could fit really well into the loom that was jammed. And then they would pull out the jam, essentially, the fabric and thread that was jammed in the machine, and then the machine would start working again, and then crush the child, and no thanks. Very many dead children in the textile industry.
Well, actually, it was very common back then not to name your child until the age of, I think, 8. It was very common just to have child number 1, number 2, number 3. Oh, great, you're 8, so happy birthday, John.
Happy birthday,
thank you, Father.
George.
And there's little George smoking a cigarette after the day of the textile factory.
Literally. Oh, wow. The fun times. Yay, the industrialization.
Yeah. So, going back to the Titanic here. So, 2.5 years later, on the 31st of March, 1911, the Olympic, the world's newest, largest ship, weighing 45,000 tons. Remember, 32,000 tons was the weight of the Lusitania and the Mauretania. So they went from 32,000 to 45,000 tons. Just as a big screw you. So that's 13,000 tons more.
Oh my god.
Just to give an example of how crazy shipbuilding was in this time. 10 years ago, the world's largest ship, 1901, was 20,000 tons. So in a span of 10 years, they more than doubled in size. 10 years. That's unbelievably short. You know?
Yes.
That's like going from the CN Tower to the world's largest to the Burj Khalifa 5 years later, you know? It's like, what?
What happened? Technological advances.
It really was a golden age. It was competition. It was the competition to beat each other. And the more competition, the more demand there were for travel. And there more immigration and stuff, so the more ships they needed. And it just kept going and going and going and going. So, then, disaster strikes. On the 20th of September, 1911, the Olympic collided with a British cruiser called the HMS Hawke, tearing a massive hole into the side of the Olympic. But because of Olympic's new fancy safety feature, watertight compartments, which means the ship could stay afloat. Clearly, this new technology that they stole from the Germans, by the way, cough, cough, ignore that, is clear that these new ships were quite obviously unsinkable. That's called foreshadowing.
Yay, English literature.
7 months later, the Titanic was finished construction, but because of a small alteration in her design, She became 1,000 tons heavier than the Olympic, making her the largest ship in the world. Only by 1,000 tons, because of one small tiny
Only
detail
by 1,000
that I'll get
tons.
into later. Only by 1,000. Well, what's 1,000 tons to 40?
Very
you know?
true.
45, actually. So then came her sea trials. Sea trials are the speed test, the safety test. How quick can she slow down? And yeah, how fast can she go and stop? Yeah, I think you get the point. So you remember that blue ribbon that I was talking
The
about?
platinum
The
medal?
world's fastest ship? Yeah, who do you think won
The
it?
Titanic.
No!
Oh my god.
No, Bruce Ismay, the chairman of the Great Star Line, couldn't care about fast ships. He wanted to hit Cunard differently. He hit them in luxury. The Titanic was absolutely the most luxurious ship in the world. Not only for first class, third class as well. The third class cabins and living areas were considered top notch, even luxurious to the third class. And yeah,
That's impressive.
you think third class, you think you think cattle, right? You think stuffing people with disease and poor conditions in there. No, it's not. They were healthy. They weren't allowed on the ships, aka into the United States, without being tested for lice, which was a huge one. You couldn't get on board if you had lice. You had health checks. So everybody down there was healthy, and they were treated as such. They were given clean areas to live, essentially. It was not a bad... I wouldn't mind living down there. So, that's not all they had. First class passengers were given a gymnasium, a Turkish bath, private massage room, heated swimming pool, a squash ball court, a barber shop. The Turkish baths are actually in near perfect condition today. They've been preserved so amazingly. You go in there and the blue tile is still on the wall, perfect as the day it sank.
Wow.
The pool, though, is locked away. It's sealed off by one of those watertight door compartments I was talking about. We haven't seen it since it sank. Nobody's seen it.
That's so sad.
I really want to see
I really want to see it
Yeah,
too.
I really want to see it. No, but we can't. It's behind a giant iron
I
door.
have a question.
So, steel door. What's the question?
When they found the Titanic, were they able to pull it out
Yeah.
of the water?
Actually, they didn't try it doing the whole thing because the whole thing would just fall apart. There is a piece, though. It's called the big piece that they managed to pull out. I can't tell you the exact size of it, but it's huge. Like, look at your wall. It's like 3 of your walls, essentially. And they managed to pull that up, and it was on display in the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, and I touched it.
Ooh.
So I can officially be one of the few people in the world that said I touched the Titanic.
Damn.
Sorry to the security. Yeah, sorry to the security that said don't touch with the wire around. I'm pretty sure I'm the reason there's glass there now because my ass reached over and touched it. So we're gonna mostly be talking about first class because they're the only ones that matter. I feel second class. Second class got a big shaft. Nobody talks about them. Nobody talks about their life. No. It's always first or third.
Exactly, because it's either the most rich or the most poor. You don't get in between. No one cares about the middle child.
Nobody. Exactly, nobody cares about the middle class. I think you mean. So, on board there were 2 restaurants. Just for first class, there were 2 restaurants. Remember, I said everything here is first class. So there's 2 restaurants just for first class. The main restaurant, as described by a survivor named Walter Douglas, was as follows. It was the last word in luxury. The tables were grey with pink roses and white daisies. The stringed orchestra playing music from Puccini and Tchaikovsky. The food was superb. Caviar, lobster, quail from Egypt, plovers, eggs, and hothouse grapes and fresh peaches. This guy was high class. This guy was a millionaire, and he's like, oh my god, the last word in luxury. Can you imagine?
That's when you know it's a luxurious.
Yeah, but the weird thing is, actually, you know how they're the Olympic ship, right? It had everything the Titanic had. So if you see pictures of Titanic inside, those aren't Titanic. Those are photographs from the Olympic.
Huh.
And not only that, this style went out of fashion like 5 years later. They had to refurnish the whole ship because it was out of fashion. It went out of fashion so quickly.
Is it because...
I wouldn't say 5 years later. Let's say 10
Oh, yeah.
years.
I mean, there are probably very many historical factors, including the Great Depression, that changed the aesthetic of the 20s. Well, the 10s. Or the Roaring 20s. I mean, the 20s were their own aesthetic.
Well, you had during the First World War, the Olympic was commissioned as a troop ship. So it was kind of irrelevant, but it was afterward during the 20s where it went out of fashion really, really, really quickly. You know, you think Titanic, you think thick corsets, you think men with top hats, and you think things like that. That was not a thing in the 20s. And the fashion went with it.
I mean, the 20s was
You know
a
what I mean?
completely different time.
Oh, yeah, it was complete. Yeah, from 10 years before, it was a whole nother world. So, what else? I kept scrolling, and I'm lost. I'm like, I can't be nearly finished. So, dinner was the highlight of the day that would last several hours, usually up to 8 courses. There is a marvelous video that I will link in the YouTube description of a restaurant that serves Titanic's final meal. It is one of my favorite videos of all time, and it is on my top 5 list before I die, is to eat at this restaurant. Though it's $400 per person.
Oh my
so.
God.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's in Ireland. I think it's in Belfast. And I really want to go. I need to make a pilgrimage to Belfast, Titanic City. You know?
Forget about religious pilgrimages. Your religion's Titanic.
Oh, hell no. I'm going on a Titanic pilgrimage. I want to walk with a stick across Ireland until I reach Titanic. So, yeah, okay, I'm going on a tangent here, but remember I said Harland and Wolff, the people who built the Titanic? The dry dock is still there. So you can go see the dry dock where they built the Titanic. And there's an amazing museum right next to it as well, which I got to go see with my stick and pilgrimage. So, Titanic had 2 restaurants and a dining salon, S-A-L-O-O-N.
Saloon.
I have no idea. Saloon. I think westerns, bursting into the saloon. It wasn't like that. It was more like a restaurant to relax in, no dress code and a buffet, like most ships these days. That's the best place to go, by the way. While the other two places had dress codes and things like that. So there were also 2 cafes on board. The second cafe was not on the Olympic. Do you remember what I said earlier about it was 1,000 tons heavier? That was the second cafe. They noticed on the side of the ship. On the sides of the ship there were these promenade decks that weren't being used by anybody. They were empty. They would look at the people on the Olympic and go, okay, nobody's walking here. Let's turn it into a cafe. So that's what they did. They extended the walls out and they made it into a cafe.
Intelligent use of
They got an empty room. Let's use it. Exactly. That's what you got to do. So other than restaurants, there were lounges. There was a smoke room. This was men's only, by the way. No ladies allowed in the smoke room. Reading and writing rooms. And it just goes on and on and on. There's so much to do. But dinner was the highlight. You spend your whole day waiting for dinner, and then you spend the rest of your day, 8 hours or so at dinner. Talking about your wealth.
And lavishing on a lobster.
Exactly. So, on April 10th, 1912, the Titanic departed on its maiden voyage from Southampton, England, carrying 920 passengers. Captained by veteran Edward Smith, who at the time was actually a celebrity, which is so weird to me. A ship's captain was the celebrity. Name one ship captain ever.
Nobody.
Yeah. Well, you got Edward Smith. Everybody knew who he was, even before Titanic sank. Because he was actually the captain of the Olympic when it crashed into the other ship.
Oh my God.
So
everybody knows.
Yeah. Oops. So the Titanic was departing from the pier, and it caused a displacement in the water so large, the SS City of New York broke from its cables and nearly smashed into the Titanic. But a little tugboat they called the Vulcan whooshed in and saved the day. So it's kind of weird to think the SS City of New York nearly ended the Titanic's voyage, where it was heading for New York City.
Wow. Foreshadowing.
I don't know. Foreshadowing. Coincidence? I think not. Yeah, spoilers. It sank, by the way. It didn't make it.
In case you didn't know.
In case you didn't know. So, off she went on our voyage. On her maiden voyage to where?
New York City.
No!
Oh my god.
She had to stop off at Cherbourg, France first, where she picked up... Yeah, she was so large, she couldn't fit on the docks at Cherbourg, so they had to ferry people out onto the ship. One of those ferries is still around today. It is the only White Star ship still in existence, called the SS Nomadic. See? I see. Nomadic.
It's
the only one.
Steamship.
Yes, Steamship Nomadic. And it's in Belfast, too. You can go see it, which I plan to do on my pilgrimage with my stick. So, in Cherbourg, she picked up 274 passengers, and she set sail for...
New York City.
No! Queenstown, Ireland. So, where she picked up another 123 passengers, and she was too large to fit there, too, so they had to tugboat people out. So, that made a total number of passengers, 1,316, 913 crew, making a grand total of 229. If you match up the numbers, they don't actually add, because people did get off in Cherbourg and Queenstown.
Lucky people.
So, but leaving Queenstown, there were 1,316 passengers. So, Olivia, on the 11th of April, she left Queenstown for...
New York City!
New York!
Yay!
She was scheduled to arrive on the 17th of April. Dock at Pier 59.
She did not.
6 days of absolute smooth luxury sailing. What could possibly go wrong?
Says every person right before it goes horribly wrong.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is part 1.
No.
That's part 1. Leaving you on a cliffhanger.
You're kidding.
Leaving you on a cliff. I'm not kidding you.
Oh my god.
Tune in next week to hear part 2.
That is rude. But I like it. We're on a cliffhanger. It gives me inspiration to listen to next week's.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, you're not going to be
Clearly not. I'm just going to be listening. Just you talking into the void.
So, I wish to end this with a quote from Captain Smith, made in 1907. I could not imagine any condition which would cause a ship to founder. Modern shipbuilding has gone beyond that.
Foreshadowing.
The man who sailed the ship to its death.
Oh, man.
Spoilers.
All right. Well, that was very educational. I'm not going to say anything about it yet because part 2 is not done. And I'm really curious to know what happens later. Because I have learned so much. Oh my gosh. I have learned so much already.
You learned too much. You didn't need to know any of this.
Now I know. Someone's
gonna kidnap you, though. Someone's gonna kidnap you. Put a gun to your head and say,
how many cafes were on the Titanic?
The Cunard ships ended in what?
Yeah.
Good
Thanks.
job. You can go now. You're
Thank
free.
you.
Just don't tell anybody you were down here.
Takes gun, puts back in pocket.
You're safe this time.
All right. That was very educational.
So, yeah, that was everything from why they built it up until the day they sailed away from Queenstown. Until the last day she saw land.
Oh,
that's a good way to end it.
That's cute. All right. Well, on that note, that's very wonderful. It's a very solid, pleasant note to end on.
Yes. It's a good happy ending, unlike next week, where it's going to be a bit more, not
That's okay.
happy and
I approve.
fun.
I'm ready for the sadness. I may do something also kind of down and sad next week. I think I will. Okay, fantastic.
How about 2 seconds of awkward silence and then we end it?
Okay, fantastic. Let's do it.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.